Hey everyone, this is Doris. I think we've got a lot of content to cover today, so we'll go ahead and get started. We're 3 minutes in. So again, my name is Doris Lin, and welcome to Design Thinking for Digital Transformation. We're all very excited to have you here today with us because we'd love to share how and why we think design thinking can help accelerate digital transformation and what you can do to start practicing design thinking today. So just a quick agenda. We'll start with a little bit about ourselves, then we'll jump right into why design thinking for digital transformation matters, what design thinking is, and how to start. Then we'll close with a Q&A to answer any questions you might have. So as you come across any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to click the Q&A button you see in your control bar there, and type in your questions. And then towards the end of our presentation here, we'll take a look at those questions, okay? All right, so I'll start by introducing myself. Okay, my name is Doris Lin, and I'm a Managing Director of Creative at Optimity. I oversee our creative competency and our user experience team here. And I also have Jenny Lin and Justing Chong from our design team here, and they'll be talking to you about design thinking today. We also have Scot Alexander, a managing director. Scott specializes in program management and process optimization in the healthcare industry. And he'll be sharing with us a case study where design thinking played a key part in its success. For those of you who may not know who we are, Optimity Advisors is an innovation consultancy that help organizations rapidly discover, build, and launch human-centered strategies and solutions that embrace the complexities of our digital world. We're comprised of a diverse team of experts, which allow us to deliver an end-to-end solution from strategy and innovation to research and analysis, user experience design, information management, technology enablement, and implementation. Our tagline is strengthen today, create tomorrow, because we are a strong believer in optimizing your existing business in order to deliver value today, while keeping your eye on that North Star so that you can work towards that future and build up your capabilities to stay relevant and competitive tomorrow. So for our webinar today, we're going to be focusing on the create tomorrow part. All right, so before we dive into design thinking, I want to first align on our understanding of what digital transformation is. Then we can talk about how design thinking is relevant. So what is digital transformation? Here's one definition. Digital transformation is a fundamental change in business and society that leverages today's technology in a state of constant improvement and innovation to improve the way we live and work. So in this larger context, the digital era impacts really every aspect of our daily lives. Now, bringing it back into the business context, it is not just about digitizing your process, data, or product. I mean, that's digitalization, which may still be a step within digital transformation, but digital transformation is about how you can take advantage of digital technology to reimagine the way you do business and how you deliver value to your customer. Netflix is a great example. Netflix started out as a DVD mail order service and disrupted the brick and mortar video rental business. Then digital innovation made streaming video possible, and Netflix became a streaming service. Today, Netflix is now taking on traditional TV network and production studio all at once by creating original content and offering a large library of on-demand shows that are personalized to your taste. Netflix would have withered away years ago if it had simply focused on DVD distribution, but instead, by maximizing the latest digital capabilities and focusing on what its customer wants in entertainment, they totally reinvented themselves, and some might even say redefined entertainment. So why is digital transformation so relevant for businesses today? What are the drivers, you might ask? Well, first and foremost, technology is advancing so quickly. Think about with mobile, cloud, artificial intelligence, sensors, analytics, among others. The pace of change is accelerating faster and faster. iPhone didn't even exist yet. And since then, there's been many generations of iPhones and iPad, and now we have Alexa and Cortana and smartphones, and smart cars. You know, when you think about how much technology has progressed and changed our life, even just within the last decade or so, it's pretty mind-blowing. So then, with these rapid advances, speed and performances has really gone up. And meanwhile, the cost of technology is dropping, which means, you know, more affordable tech means a broader access for everyone. So as technology became accessible, customer behaviors and expectations are also changing. They're demanding more speed, more convenience, constant connectivities, and better service. According to the World Economic Forum report, digital transformation has the potential to add up to $100 trillion in value to the world economy by 2025. So clearly this is important, and you know, its importance and value really cannot be understated. Now, before we continue, I'd like to pause for a moment and take a poll from the audience. And we'd like to know, where are you in your organization on your digital transformation journey? And we're going to be sending out a poll, and then there's going to be a couple different choices. So you can let us know, kind of, are you in the beginning? Are you just planning for it? Or are you researching what it could mean for your company? Or are you in the middle of a digital transformation initiative? Or maybe you already have some of that experience under your belt. Let me pause for a moment and let the responses come in.
Okay, Doris, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and share the results.
Okay, great. So looks like quite a few of you already have some experiences, and some of you are thinking about it and planning, and got a few of you who are kind of, you know, in the middle where you do some research and starting something. Cool. All right. Well, for those of you maybe who had already had some experiences, you might be able to attest that digital transformation is not easy feat, right? That's a lot of parts to it. And why? Well, disruptive technologies in today's digital world is fast changing, unpredictable, and undefined. And businesses are in general having a hard time catching up with the speed of execution. They might be missing out on new growth opportunities because they're struggling to keep up with that pace of change. And innovation is about creating something new, right? That didn't exist before. So we can't just look in the past as a proxy for our future. And some of the other challenges might be, you know, perhaps resistance to change, or lack of clear vision, or a fragmented approach. So, you know, what that means is businesses really needs new ways of working to anticipate change and generate new ideas fast enough to ride this wave of innovation. But how? Now, this is where design thinking comes in. Design thinking is a hands-on, human-centric approach to problem solving that fosters creativity and innovation. Design thinking approach a problem to be solved kind of from the opposite direction, you know, typically taken by analytical approach. It begins with imagining a solution that doesn't yet exist, outline a pathway to realize it, instead of beginning by just assessing today's problem and simply seeking a way to correct it. This approach to problem solving is what leads to innovation, and innovation can lead to differentiation and a competitive advantage. At the end of the day, your business starts with your customers too. So one core value grounded in design thinking is that people don't buy products, they buy a solution to a problem. Here's a quote from Professor Levitt from the Harvard Business School. He says, people don't want a 1/4 inch drill, they want a 1/4 inch hole. Design thinking helps you start with people, and it can help you start with defining the problem to solve and look for the best way to solve it. Now my colleague Jenny is going to dive deeper into what design thinking is.
Awesome. Thank you, Doris. Yeah, so let's jump into understanding a little bit more about the term design thinking. So what is that anyway? Before we start, I'd love to get another poll from you all. How familiar are you with design thinking? And so we'll be sending out a poll. To see it, just go ahead and click into the Zoom and a little window should pop up. And your choices are no idea, that's why I'm here. I've heard of it, but want to know more. I'm familiar, but I'm looking to build momentum, and I'm a practitioner. And I see, you know, as votes are coming in, we do have a variety across the board, and this is really, really great. Let's see.
Great. I'll go ahead and share the results, Jenny.
Awesome. Great. So it looks like a lot of you are familiar, but are looking to build momentum, with a lot of folks also spread out in between, all the way from being a beginner at it and to a practitioner. Now, if we don't get to something that you're curious about, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, but this should be a great foundation for everyone, plus a little bit more. Awesome. So to begin, let's define design thinking. It was popularized by these three specific gentlemen: Roger Martin of the Rotman School of Management, David M. Kelly, and Tim Brown of IDEO. And IDEO is one of the top global design and consulting firms. Tim Brown explains design thinking this way: design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. In other words, design thinking answers three critical questions. 1, human desirability. Will people like it? 2, technical feasibility. Can we actually make it? And 3, economic viability. Does this make business sense? Design thinking takes on each of these categories by bringing in multiple perspectives, from the end user to the internal staff to business stakeholders. And by answering each of these questions, design thinking can build your foundation of research, viability, and innovation. This approach allows us to produce new value in a service, product, and overall brand experience. Following this approach is not only effective to solve problems, it's also crucial to creating something that makes people's lives easier, is feasible to do so, and makes good business sense. And of course, the most important thing we must remember is that design thinking is human-centered. Now, what does this mean? Being human-centered means putting the end user, otherwise known as the customer, at the forefront of your research and discovery. What you'll find is that a business question can just as easily become a human-centered question right on the opposite end. Take this chart, for example. The business question, how can we increase conversion rates on our site, can easily be reframed into what's the easiest way to help users figure out if our product fits their needs and encourage them to buy it. You can see that they are two sides of the same coin. If you address the human needs around product desirability, naturally you will help conversion rates on your site. By focusing on the real problem to solve and turning it into the right question to ask, it will allow for creative and innovative new solutions to be considered early in the process. In the end, what you'll have is a better user experience, greater brand loyalty, and overall a stronger product. It's also important to realize that design thinking is both a philosophy and a practice. As we've said before, it's important to adopt a human-centered approach. By integrating it across your company, it will help outline your company's overall strategy to solving problems. Secondly, it's focused on finding the right problem to solve. Is your company asking the right questions, or is it focused on maintaining the status quo? And lastly, is your company encouraging innovative new ways of thinking that change the game? Additionally, design thinking is a practice. There are 5 stages of design thinking that are tangible processes to help an organization solve problems. Additionally, an agile methodology must be in place to support the natural iterative life cycle of design and development. My colleague will take you through the 5 stages of design thinking in a moment, but first, let's talk about creating the right environment for human-centered design. So despite design thinking's rise in popularity, businesses are slow to catch up. In a 2018 report by McKinsey & Company, over 40% of the companies that they surveyed don't include their end users in any of their research or development. On the other hand, a Salesforce company, Salesforce wrote a report on lost opportunity, showing that design thinking is something we can't ignore. 73% of customers prefer to do business with brands that personalize their shopping experience. And 57% of customers say that it's absolutely critical or very important for companies they purchase from to be innovative. And lastly, 70% of respondents said that new technologies have made it easier for them to take their business elsewhere. What you can see is that from the same McKinsey report, the companies that are successful demonstrate these design thinking components. First, design must be embedded into everyone's responsibility as cross-functional talent. The design team should be working alongside marketing, engineering, and quality teams. Additionally, those teams should be taking on design thinking mindset as well. So instead of each group acting as a siloed department, design can be a cultural investment in your business by creating expectations for cross-collaboration. Secondly, companies that performed well understood that research and testing in a continuous iteration are vital to the success of the product. So currently, most companies, if they do any testing at all, is actually in the late stages of the development process. However, successful companies understand that creating a design comes from getting feedback directly from their end user from the beginning of the project to the end. Third, practicing design thinking means designing for the user experience across all platforms. So whether it's a service, a product, or a digital interface, the UX can take each of these user touch points and turn them into an overall user journey. Instead of creating specifications off of assumptions, businesses can create data around real-world pain points and address those directly. And lastly, of course, it requires leadership initiative. Companies that perform the best understood that sponsorship and support is needed from leadership to truly embed design thinking across the organizational process and structure. And its performance success should be measured and considered just as important as understanding the business revenue and costs. So you can see that building a strong organizational-wide practice of design thinking actually builds the foundation and framework for digital transformation in your organization. Now, let's take a step back from design thinking philosophy and into design thinking practice. To remember Doris's quote from earlier, people don't buy products, they buy a solution to a problem. We're going to play a game that showcases human-centered design and what it means to define the right problem to solve. Are you ready? Awesome. Well, now to start, I want you to imagine a vase. What does that look like? What material is it? Where does it live? Some of you may have pictured a simple vase made of glass or ceramic. Perhaps a few of you imagined a fancy one, or maybe one even in your own home. Now, if you were a vase company, you could probably continue on to create fancier, more interesting, and ornate versions of a vase. If your definition of the problem to solve were to create more interesting vases. But this brings me to the next part of the activity. This time, I'd like you to imagine how you enjoy flowers in your home. What does that look like? What type of flowers are you imagining, and where are they being kept? You may find that your ideas are much more diverse and creative. Perhaps you're someone who likes to collect flowers around your neighborhood and put them into glass jars. Perhaps you have a garden or a windowsill garden bed to hold your flowers. Or perhaps you like hanging plants because they frame the window nicely and look amazing when the sunlight filters through. By asking a human-centered question, you're able to generate so many more ideas because we understood the problem we were designing for. The vase is simply a solution for a way to hold flowers. If you were only ever to explore designing a vase, you would be limiting yourself. All you might end up with is a fancier vase. On the other hand, taking a step back to understand the why helps us look at the real problem and come up with creative ways to solve it. And that's the essence of design thinking. Keep this example in mind as I hand off the next portion to my colleague Justin, who will take you through the 5 stages of design thinking.
Thanks, Jenny. So in this step, I'd like to go over the 5 stages of design thinking, kind of break down each of the stages and give you a little bit of an overview on what each stage entails. So the design thinking framework is made up of 5 different stages that make up the entire process. And throughout this process, you'll find yourself shifting gears from making concrete observations to thinking conceptually at a high level, then back down again to the details. The 5 stages here are empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. As you can see here, the design thinking process is iterative, and you can go back to a previous step depending on the results and findings of each stage. So this first stage is empathize. To create meaningful innovations, you need to know your users and care about their lives, right? So this first stage of the process is crucial to a user-centered design process. This step allows you to gain real insight into users and their actual needs, as well as set aside any assumptions. So it's important to empathize with your users in order to understand their motivations, needs, and pain points. And we shouldn't presume to know how the customer will act. And by utilizing this stage properly, we can gain a deep understanding of where the customer's friction points are along their journey. So here we're looking for the why. Empathy is the foundation of a human-centered design process where you observe and engage with the users and immerse yourself in order to uncover their needs. Look for issues they may or may not be aware of, and look to discover the emotions that guide their behaviors. In this stage, we want to leave no stone unturned. The more we can discover, the more we are setting ourselves up for success and ultimately less risk. So in the case of the vase company, you would do something such as sending out a survey out to your mailing list, or you can ask a couple of customers if you can conduct a quick interview and ask questions in relation to their purchasing habits and their experiences. Or you can invite a small group of regulars or target customers to participate in a discovery workshop. So stage 2 is define, right? So in this stage, we're looking to bring some clarity to the problems that we're trying to solve. Framing the right problem is the only way to create the right solution, right? So the insight gained from the empathize stage will help you pinpoint where to focus your time and energy. And so in this stage, we want to define the problem into a clean and concise problem statement. So this stage can be a little overwhelming. You'll discover a multitude of problems that need attention. However, the aim of this phase is not to overwhelm, but to make these problems digestible by prioritizing them into individual manageable opportunities. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see how we can categorize various points of views by identifying the unique user groups through a tool that we utilize called personas. And so the goal here is to identify the user and their needs and the insight from all the data that we've collected in the empathize stage. So back to the vase company, right? What they might do here is come up with a problem statement, right? People will buy vases to enjoy flowers, but they don't know how to care for the flowers or order them for their home. So here you can use this problem statement as a North Star in the next stages to focus your proposed solutions on the actual users and their specific problem. So this is stage 3, ideate. Now this stage opens up the opportunity to discover and explore solutions from all angles. Here is the name of the game is quantity over quality. It's not about coming up with the right idea. It's about generating the broadest range of possibilities. So this is where key individuals from other teams are encouraged to collaborate together to think outside of the box. Now with the problem clearly defined in the define stage, right, you want to harness the collective perspectives and strengths of your teams. Now you shouldn't be overthinking things in this phase or coming up with just one solution, right? You want to defer judgment and prioritize ideas. The ideate phase is quick, creative, and collaborative. So for the example on the vase company, They can utilize a suite of tools and activities. So here in the images examples here, they can create quick user flow charts, storyboard sketch, or they could work as a team and collectively share ideas and concepts at the same time with Post-it notes. So we're looking for rapid ideas here and the ability to move at the speed of thought. So yeah, some of the hypothetical ideas in this case, right, could be a flower subscription service that tailors the size and style of bouquet to match your vase, or a smart vase that tells you when to change your flower's water. So that brings us to stage 4, which is prototyping. And at this stage, this is where you get to experiment with the different ideas from the ideate stage. Now here you want to fail early and often, which allows you to get smarter faster. Now here you can begin to challenge your assumptions and discover issues early on. And when you prototype, whether you're creating a flow diagram, a wireframe, or making a clay model, you're building to think. The process gives you something tangible to problem solve with. Now you're prototyping the experience to communicate how something looks, feels, and interacts. Right? Prototyping is a quick way to test an idea before spending a lot of money to build the real thing. Now this stage should also be very fast-paced with quick and efficient improvements. And we're looking to create a safe environment where it's okay to fail and to learn from those failures without much risk. And at the end of this phase, you should have a good idea of what works and what doesn't work. So that brings us to stage 5, which is testing. So in the testing phase, you will have the opportunity to learn about your solutions and more about your users. So ideally, you want to test your prototypes with the real end users as much as possible. So here we're testing to learn, right? With usability testing or on a narrow selection of your site visitors, we want to let the user experience the prototype through user testing, focus groups, surveys, or user acceptance testing. We can observe their experience walking through the prototype. Here you can interview the user and ask questions about what they like and dislike, what they see missing, or what they may want to change. From these observations and feedback, we can refine our point of view, learn more about our users, and make the next iteration of the product better. So in the case of the vase company, they can invite a small target user group to interact with the prototype. With their cooperation and input, the team can observe users in an actual setting or ask them to share their experience virtually through video conferencing or recorded interactions. And we can incorporate that feedback into the next iterations. So in summary, the 5 stages of design thinking can be utilized to create digital transformation, right? Each stage of the process helps to further refine and set the next step up for success. Now, there is a large suite of tools, methodologies, and activities to help ensure that the most value is obtained at every stage. And now I'd like to introduce one of our managing directors, Scot Alexander, where he will share an Optimity case study that showcases how design thinking bolstered the digital transformation of an enrollment process.
Sure, thanks, Justin. Appreciate you walking through the basic steps. And I think what you'll see in this case study is those steps that Doris, Jenny, and Justin just walked through reflected in a situation with a large healthcare player in enrollment. So you can go to the next slide. And this was a major healthcare insurance company with about 5 to 6 million members. And the interesting thing about their enrollment process that was in need of repair, let's say, was that it had a high amount of manual interaction with the operators or the processors, as they called them. So it made it a perfect setup to merge the design thinking methodology and deliverables that you just heard with a more of a typically linear process optimization approach, which we'll talk to here in a second. So the challenges they faced are were not uncommon at all. Disparate systems, high amounts of manual work, they were limited in staffing capacity. And because of these disparate legacy systems, the UIs that they were using in their enrollment systems varied quite a bit and just weren't easy to use at all. So that led to a lot of fragmentation in the process, people doing different things in different directions. That produced errors, which inevitably produces waste in the process and cost in areas that didn't have to be spent. And not just in enrollment, but also downstream, impacting claims and customer service. So it was, as I mentioned, it was an ideal tee-up for the merged approach that we used at this client, combining design thinking with process optimization. So the steps that you see at the top are actually lean measured steps or lean process steps. So the define, measure, analyze, ideate, and then validate and plan are in the common approach to solving Lean Six Sigma process problems. What we did is we merged that with design thinking that has remarkably parallel processes to it that you just heard Justin talk through: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, map very strongly to those lean steps and approaches that you see at the top of the page. So what we did is we took the very iterative approach to design thinking, starting with journey mapping, producing design, UI design mock-ups, and then putting those back through design workshops so that we could refine those. Based on those iterative outputs, we then spun those into the future state process design and simulated that in the simulation model, which we'll show you an example of here fairly quickly. Once we simulated, that revealed bottlenecks, constraints, and areas of the process that were affected both by steps or activities in the process that were automated or were supposedly automated, and steps that were done manually by the processors. So that provided a convenient validate and plan, or in design terms, prototype and test, that we could feed back into the rapid prototyping iterations of the design process, feed it back into the workshops, check them against the various personas or operator personnel that were operating the enrollment process, adjust the journey mapping, adjust the design prototype of the UI, and then feed that result back into the simulation model. So it, in essence, it taught an old dog new tricks. The existing tried and true process of lean process optimization merged with design thinking and iterative design improvement created a situation where we could very rapidly create scenarios to optimize and produce what turned out to be the optimized enrollment process. So in essence, this is the instantiation of what Justin just talked through. We went through the empathize and define stage with the various groups that owned various parts of the enrollment process, produced personas, walked those personas through the journey mapping, and really got the problems out on the table or the whiteboard as you see there. And so to ideate, we performed the same type of design thinking exercises where it initiated with brainstorming, lots of Post-it notes up on the same whiteboards, addressing those problems, coming up with ideas to solve them. And then we dot voted where those types of solutions applied the best, and it was done collectively by the group. So it was the best of both worlds. We were able to harness the collective insight and experience of various groups that were part of the enrollment process, but we were able to get to decisions fairly quickly around where the pain points were. And so what that surfaced was fairly concrete examples of different pain points in the enrollment process surfacing, not surprisingly, around the need to eliminate paper and create more of a digital intake, the ability to train members better, the ability to improve the actual system, the UI that the processes were using. And that enabled us to target the parts of the simulation model for the process that we could simulate and create scenarios around to understand, well, if we improve these, what would the outcome be? So the UI piece of this was modeled in the same way and looked like this, where we improved both the forms that the operators used to feed in manual information, whether it was enrollments from mail or fax or email, and then provide them a dashboard that told them exactly where they were in that process. So what you're seeing is an example of the mock-up and the continuously improving model of the UI. And then we took those improvements and fed them into this simulation model. So as you can see it run, the simulation model takes those three channels, mailroom, fax, and EDI, and simulates where each of those enrollments were creating bottlenecks or constraints. So the drums, the red parts that you see framing up in the simulation model represent areas where enrollments were being clogged up. And not surprisingly, in the mailroom or in the whole sent mail process, they were being constrained quite a bit. This is a very simplified version of it, but it revealed pretty quickly where we needed to do some work. So we just continued to iterate on this model. We drove back the areas for improvement back into the mock-up that you just saw in the UI, changed it, and then re-simulated what we thought the optimal future state process would be. So really what came out of this was a bunch of things, which the client, quite frankly, was surprised we were able to produce so quickly. And again, the reason was we used the same design thinking approach that you just heard discussed, but infused it into a very quickly iterating simulation modeling approach for the process. So in fairly short order, we were able to run a lot of scenarios, test those different permutations, so to speak, of the lean processes, both created by the changed UI of the design-centered mockups, as well as other lean approaches to either reroute processes, change capacity, change resources, but in essence, drive to evidence-based decisions and evidence-based approaches and direction around what the best and most optimized process was end-to-end, which is what the simulation modeling ultimately helped us show in a data-driven way. It also created a UI model that the client could use to start and feed their agile user story process to actually design and build this new UI. It spawned a roadmap of continuous improvement projects that part of which were the design and build of that UI, part of which were just traditional lean improvement, take the waste out of claims, I'm sorry, not claims, of the QA pieces out of the actual enrollment intake, using advanced OCR systems, advanced robotic systems, or just rerouting paths of work from various departments of QA to rework to actual ID card shipment. So it enables to get and continue that improvement in a very data-driven way. As you see, the ability to show that optimized process, it was easy to describe to management in a model. It's pretty easy to see where the processes or the steps were being improved, and where those the constrained areas were being reduced as we continue to run those scenarios and optimize it. It also improved the impact to downstream processes like claims and customer service and billing. And the bottom line is the client is now taking the models that we developed, both the UI model as well as the process model, and they're implementing them. So that's always something you like to see. So anyway, this is a very pragmatic view of where we deployed both design thinking with process optimization.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Hopefully that was a nice demonstration of how design thinking works. So now that you've learned about what design thinking is and the process and see how it works, hopefully you're thinking, great, where do I start? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And as Jenny talked about earlier, design thinking is a practice and a philosophy. So beyond the 5 phases that Justin had described, consider these 7 mindsets that were developed by the Stanford D School that empower your thinking and creativity. So first and foremost is focus on human value. That's probably drilled into our webinar by now. Think about the people you're designing a solution for, because by focusing on the people you're designing for, you can really unlock new ideas that you might not have thought of without this human-centered approach. And the show don't tell mentality means that you communicate your vision by creating experiences using visuals and telling good stories. Then a big part of design thinking is experimenting with prototype. So it helps you make an idea real in order to better understand it and think through the problem. It is an integral part of the innovation process. And always be aware of where you are in the design process, what you hope to accomplish, and what to do next. Let the process be your guide. This bias toward action mindset means that you are more focused on action than thinking. So instead of having meetings and just talking about an idea, try to do more making and doing, because you learn more and gain better insights on how to improve your ideas. And bring together teams with different backgrounds and experiences and viewpoints, because diversity will lead to breakthrough insights and solutions. Last but not least, explain your ideas as clearly and simply as possible. Frame it in a way that others can understand quickly so you can inspire them and fuel ideation. Now, not only does design thinking foster innovation, but the collaborative nature of the process and mindset also strengthen teams by creating common grounds. As we all know, teams are really at the foundation of a successful workplace, but they can only move as quickly as they can successfully communicate. And because individuals just naturally comes from different backgrounds and experiences, often they might have different interpretation of the same concepts. So sometimes it might cause miscommunications and even frustrations. And design thinking circumvent this friction by involving all team members from the very beginning of the process, usually via workshop-based activities. As the whole teams move through these exercises together, a shared vocabulary just organically develops, and a shared understanding, excuse me, will lead to quicker alignment. So the team can spend less time arguing about the what and spend more time focused on the how. Secondly, a key principle of design thinking is show, don't tell. So throughout the design thinking process, we typically produce various tangible artifacts such as empathy maps, journey mapping, wireframes, etc. And having tangible artifacts allows you to communicate and clarify complex ideas through visualization. And that gives your team something tangible to touch and feel and reference back to over and over again and orient yourself throughout the process. And it also builds good group cohesion because it provides an evidence of something you've created together. And that always gives a team a sense of shared success. And last but not least, design thinking promotes a trust-based team culture. In a traditional hierarchical organization is usually, the boss or the person with the loudest voice whose ideas wins, right? But design thinking is inherently democratic in that we strive for participation from all levels across multiple disciplines. And the ideation methods like sticky notes and dot voting make sure that all ideas are weighted equally because everybody has to contribute and is anonymous. Now, this by no means is the same thing as decision by committee, because it's collective and co-creation, collective thinking and co-creation encourages fresh ideas, but its very structured methodologies drive decisions quickly and efficiently. So again, design thinking, while it's mainly about innovation and creativity, but the collaborative nature of the processes do help bring teams together and focus on a shared goal and allow everyone to have a voice and a hand in creating the future. And this helps to build a positive, trust-based culture that motivates everyone on your team. And oftentimes we also find that it increases buy-in and adoption from your products and ideas. Now, just a little quick reality check though. Design thinking is very powerful, but it's not a magic pill. Even businesses that implement it can still fail at transformation. And that's because it alone doesn't fix everything. You can't just assign design thinking to your product group or relegate to design team and expect innovation to just happen tomorrow, right? There's some key element that we should keep in mind. First of all, design thinking should be deployed by experienced practitioners who understand the framework and tools thoroughly so they can help ensure that the user perspective is always considered from the very beginning and you're driving towards the right problem to solve and not jumping to solutions too quickly. If you have a design team or work with a design team, that might be a good place to start for guidance because a lot of the philosophy and practices we talked about is inherent to the designer's creative process. And as we've mentioned a few times, design thinking is a cross-functional approach. So it's going to take strong collaboration across different expertise to identify the problem and develop a successful solution. And design thinking does not negate the need for analysis, planning, or strategy. So think about how you can integrate these processes in a seamless way. Finally, successful transformation with design thinking or any other framework will only work when businesses have company-wide buy-in. So this is from leadership sponsorship to include design thinking as part of your company's culture to having everyone on your team believing in and practicing the methodology. If implemented within the right framework, with the right hands on deck, through the right lens, design thinking can offer some powerful transformational opportunities for your entire organization to leverage. And as evidence, here we have a graph showing a sample of companies that practice design thinking and use design strategically in the business process. And this includes Apple, Coca-Cola, Nike, Disney, to name a few. And they tend to grow faster and have higher return than other S&P 500s, over 2 times higher, in fact. And this demonstrates that when design principles and design thinking is applied to business strategy and innovation, it can transform the way your organization develop the products, services, and processes and giving them that competitive edge. So before we end our webinar, just a couple of thoughts to take away with. To recap, even though design thinking has the word design in it, it doesn't mean you have to be a designer to think like one. Because design thinking starts with setting intention, identifying areas for innovation, and generating fresh ideas, and everyone can do that. So when used effectively, it has the power to transform nearly everything from brands to strategy, technologies, logistics, experiences, industries, and even governments. So hopefully after this webinar, on your next project or initiative to develop a strategy or improve a product or increase your customer engagement, you will be asking yourself this question: how will you bridge the human needs of your customers with today's technology to create added value? So that concludes our presentation part, and thank you so much for coming to our webinar. And now we'd like to open the floor for some Q&A. And I think that's already been a couple that was sent in.
Yes, there has, Doris. And I'd like to encourage, anybody on the webinar, if you'd like to ask questions, feel free to use that Q&A button in your toolbar. Scott, first question's for you, pretty direct question, but as you were going through the pain point simulation, we had someone wondering what was the software you were using to create that simulation?
It's a software called Simulate, simply enough. SIMUL with an 8 at the end. Check them out at their website. They were born out of the manufacturing arena, but then have morphed into to healthcare and other industries. In essence, what you saw in that model was not writing code. We just called it Visio on steroids, where in essence you're dragging and dropping just like a regular Visio model, and then you can dynamically energize, so to speak, that model over certain time periods, which is the video that you saw.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Another question we had come in, team. Someone asked, I can see how design thinking would work well for building bespoke automation workflows and to develop the technology to solve problems. Can design thinking also be used for building a tech stack where technology is out of the box and has no limitations? How do you evolve the process if you have little control over UX, UI, solution scope, etc.?
That's a great question. And I can start, and others, Scott and Jenny, feel free to chime in. I think if you think about design thinking at its core, it's really about a way to solve problems. So the problem can manifest in very many different ways, including technology, right? I mean, of course, when it comes to technology, there are requirements or limitations, right, that you have to work within when you're talking about building a tech stack. But we have come across, in our past engagement where there was, an enterprise system, that was already implemented. And, it had low adoption because it was really difficult to configure, and you really couldn't configure it in a way that is more optimized for, their business process or their users. So I think, again, really thinking about, and what we've done, and maybe this will kind of, have some cross-reference, is we did do a design thinking workshop. So we did start from the user, because, at the end of the day, at the other end, there's still an end user that's using the application that's driven upon or built upon your tech stack, right? So, based on your users, who they are, what their jobs are, their business process, and you can look at what are the biggest pain points, and perhaps some of those pain points can be solved by certain configurations, and maybe sometimes it can't. And in this case, then we found a slightly different solution where we then built a web-based UI application that had an API that speaks to this enterprise system that had very deep and sophisticated functionality. But now you kind of have the best of both worlds, where there is a very user-friendly bespoke front end that user can interact with, but is still speaking to and leveraging the power of the back end. And that really increase after we've done that, the user adoption, and the adherence to the business process really increased quite a bit. Hopefully that answered your question.
Great, and I think we have time for one more here. Another question that came in was, do we have to utilize every stage of the design thinking process?
I'll kick it off, and then Jenny and Justin, I'll let you guys chime in too. I'll just start by saying that, again, we had said design thinking is a practice and a philosophy. So think of the process as a guide that is adaptable and scalable.
Yeah, definitely. If we remember the empathize, define, and then ideate, iterate, prototype, iterate model, a lot of the arrows were sort of moving back and forth. So sometimes you might start with empathize and go all the way to ideate and realize that maybe you didn't define the right problem. So you might want to go back. Additionally, sometimes, especially with business software, something might already be a little bit more structured, and where the research can come in is in the prototyping and testing phase. So there are still different methods in which you can bring in the end user. And what I found is that a lot of companies might not realize off the bat how valuable UX research is. And to start getting leadership buy-in, conducting little points of research, talking to the end user, and showcasing what those insights are actually goes a long way into building out a larger UX, UI workflow for future projects. So I would say definitely do little bits as you can and adapt and scale it to the project that you have. And hopefully that'll start building a case and also cultural expectations around when research is appropriate.
Great. So I know we're coming to time here. We have a few more questions that came in. I don't know if the team wants to stay on and answer them now. We can go through them right now.
Yeah, we can.
Sure.
We can.
And yeah, so we can stay on, and thank you so much. Let me just first say thank you for everyone for coming, because I know some of you probably need to drop on the hour and go about, you know, your business of the day. So those who, you know, wishes to stay on for the rest of the Q&A, please do. And for those who need to drop off, thank you so much for coming today.
Great. So another question we had come in, team, was what is the size of a functional design thinking team?
Ooh, that's a interesting question. I think it really depends on probably the size and makeup of your organization or your product team, kind of, you know, depending on, again, the nature of your organization. I think it's probably more about the balance and diversity of the folks that is on the team. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, you know, it would be good to and crucial to have somebody within the team that is very seasoned in practicing design thinking. And again, that might be a designer that is within your organization. You know, that might also be, you know, somebody who's a product owner, has gone through some, you know, design thinking training. You probably want to have, you know, a couple leaders, you know, who has a strong experience in design thinking. And then, you know, as you move through, let's say, you know, in a simple example, let's say this is, you know, a product team, right? You would want to have that team made out of probably somebody who's a creative thinker or designer, somebody who, you know, might be a business analyst, you know, who can help with liaisoning, you know, with the users and collecting requirements. You probably want somebody who has technical knowledge, right? Who can then contribute from, you know, any technical input or constraints. So really, it's kind of a diverse group, and then probably, you know, just like any project, you would have a project manager who, you know, is making sure we're moving through the process and staying on task and coordinating all the activities. So it's a little bit a hard question to answer in terms of size, but I think it's the makeup is keeping in mind the diversity. It's a good way to think about it.
Great, thanks, Doris. And we have one final question here. Surrounding digital transformation, how do you engage all of the departments in design thinking, as a lot of functions / operations are dependent? It could be very time consuming.
So I'm rereading the questions really quickly. How do you engage all the departments in design thinking as lots of functions are dependent? Yeah, and that's why, you know, maybe, you know, if design thinking is not something that is currently practicing in your organization, you know, it'll probably take some training. And that's why I think leadership sponsorship initiatives is important. You could, you know, start small with a couple of proof of concept projects. Because, you know, again, kind of bias towards action, right? Demonstrating, you know, actions and value is sometimes a lot more effective, you know, in getting buy-in, right, than to just, you know, just telling somebody, like, you want to show them. So you might want to start with a couple kind of initiatives and prove its ROI. And then you probably would gain interest from other groups. But this is probably a conversation that would take longer than the couple of minutes we have left. And whoever asked the question would love to kind of talk to you more about it. But you know, because you know, when we're talking about organizational change, of course, there are many different factors that plays into it, right? Like I mentioned, you know, from sponsorship to, you know, even budgeting and training. But I think if you want to start with this, I think starting with the project and just going through the process and seeing its value would be a good place to start.
I would also add on that there, Optimity, if you remember in the FEP example, had actually done a design thinking workshop with everyone that spanned about 2 days. And so that's a really great way to get all the departments in on design thinking, because then you're learning together and answering the same questions together. And you might realize that 2 departments answer the same question very differently, even though there could be a very simple solution. So I think getting everyone in the room is really, really important. And even though it might take time, it pays off dramatically in the end. And having a facilitator to go through and walk through design thinking and then come away with tangible artifacts, which might be like a workflow map or what might we statements, for example, could go a really, really long way in the digital transformation of your company.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point, Jenny. And I think in my experience, having, you know, facilitated, you know, quite a few of these design thinking workshops, what I find more often than not is we have folks who come in sort of from different departments disagreeing or not really sure what they're doing and why we're here in the beginning. But then inevitably at the end of those 2 days or those working session and spending this time together, having conversation, we always end up with, you know, a consensus. And I always say, like, the positive side effect for these, besides advancing the project, is that it really created a sense of community and a sense of mutual trust. And yeah, and then through the experience, you know, you kind of have demonstrated the value of these design thinking practices.
Great. I believe that's all the questions we had come in today.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, again. And if you come across any further questions, please don't be shy. You can email any of us. I will actually share the information on screen. So there's information for myself and Scott. So again, if you come across any other questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask us. And hopefully this has been a helpful session for you guys. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.